An assault in a hotel lobby, and the raids on Sean Combs' mansions in New York and Miami played out in front of millions on national TV and gave the world an inside look into the truth of Diddy. The video in particular, showing Cassie, Diddy's longtime girlfriend, being yanked by the hair, ragdolled to the floor, and soccer kicked. It's become the irrefutable piece of evidence of not only a harsh reality of abuse, but the true monster that rests inside of Sean Combs. The raids produced many key items of evidence, including over 1,000 bottles of baby oil, opening America's eyes into the elite media mogul's sexual deviance and substantiating the claims of over 100 alleged victims. Welcome to Exposed, Scandalous Files of the Elite, the Diddy Saga, Episode 11, The Leaks Defense. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Exposed, Scandalous Files of the Elite. I am your host, Jim Chapman, and we are continuing the Diddy Saga series with this 11th episode. And last time that I left you, I told you about the pending 120 plus lawsuits soon to be filed on Sean Combs. And while many of us are awaiting that information, much has transpired. Diddy had a preliminary hearing just a few days ago, and just prior to that, his defense dropped a little bombshell of their own, filing a motion for what is known as an evidentiary hearing and claiming major leaks from DHS, that's the Department of Homeland Security, which they claim has tainted a possible jury pool beyond repair, making it impossible for poor Diddy to get a fair trial. So we're going to get into that document, which I do have in front of me. But before we do, I want to give a few shout outs to our newest Patreon global celebrities out there. And we're going to start with Miss Vicky Crawley from the UK. Shout out to the UK. I just posted on Facebook, we're getting a bunch of listeners from all over the world, y'all. Over 50 countries now listen to Exposed Scandalous Files of the Elite, and I love to see that. So welcome, Miss Vicky. Next, we have Samantha Lamar. She is from Gideon, Missouri. And y'all, I found it interesting that Gideon, Missouri has a very small population. They only have 745 people in that town. And anybody who knows me personally knows I love those small towns. Thank you for joining our global celebrity team. And lastly, today we have Miss Mandy Tomplay. And Miss Mandy Tomplay is all the way from Port Vincent, Louisiana. And y'all, I know Port Vincent very well. It's only about 15 minutes from where I record at my studio. It sits right on the picturesque, if you will, Amite River. I want to welcome Miss Mandy Tomplay to the global celebrity tier on our Patreon. And look, Miss Mandy, if you're ever in the area, the Denham Springs area, and you pass by my studio and you see my vehicle out there, and knock on that door, and I'll give you something special just from Exposed Scandalous Files of the Elite. So let's get into this motion filed by the defense team for Diddy. And the best way to start is to explain what an evidentiary hearing is. So an evidentiary hearing, it's like a mini trial. It requires a judge to hear witness testimony, and the prosecution in this case will be required to turn over evidence related to the issues that the defense is bringing up in this particular matter. So Diddy's defense team, they're wanting to find out who has leaked what to the media. People like me got a hell of a lot of information is what they're thinking. And they want to use that to prove that Diddy can't get a fair trial. So let's get into the document. And it reads, Defendant Sean Combs moves for 4 forms of relief related to what the defense believes was a series of unlawful government leaks, which have led to damaging, highly prejudicial pretrial publicity that can only taint the jury pool and deprive Mr. Combs of his right to a fair trial. 1. An evidentiary hearing to examine government misconduct in connection with the leaks. 2. Discovery of emails, documents, and records in the possession of the government, including DHS related to the leaks. 3. A gag order prohibiting government personnel from disclosing any evidence or investigative material related to this case to any member of the media. And 4. Suppression of any evidence leaked by the government employees in violation of criminal procedure. And it goes on to say the government's scheme is to undermine Mr. Combs' right to a fair proceeding, and it has several methods and means. First, there has been a steady stream of false and prejudicial statements made by DHS agents to various press outlets over the last 7 months. Second, the agents engaged in a particularly brutal and public search of Mr. Combs' homes, during which they handcuffed Mr. Combs' innocent sons and then marched them before a news helicopter and the press. This was an apparent effort to convey that they had overwhelming evidence against Mr. Combs, justifying to the public and brutal treatment of even his children, who were handcuffed and mishandled by federal agents armed with assault rifles. Third, government employees have repeatedly leaked grand jury information and materials to the press to raise public hostility against Mr. Combs in advance of the trial. The most egregious example of this is a leak to CNN of a 2016 videotape from the Intercontinental Hotel in Los Angeles. He's talking about Cassie, y'all. Was but one of a long and documented history of leaks and false statements made with one purpose: to savage Mr. Combs' reputation prior to trial. While the government's misconduct in this case is particularly egregious, it is unfortunately part of a trend in this district. The government has learned it can strategically leak information with impunity. The court should exercise its authority to prohibit these underhanded tactics, which severely undermine a criminal defendant's right to a fair trial. At the outset, the defense wants to be clear with the court as to what our theory is and what it is not. We do not contend that the leaks were orchestrated by the U.S. Attorney's Office. Yeah, they don't want to mess with them. Rather, we contend that the false media statements and the grand jury leaks complained of below were planned and executed by DHS. As the parties develop more information in this regard, the court will see that the defense repeatedly contacted the prosecutors and stated, in substance, that their agents were leaking information to the press. Yet, regardless of what, if any, action the U.S. Attorney's Office took, the leaks continued, even until after the arrest. The reason a hearing is needed is to determine exactly what the DHS did and did not do with regard to these leaks, and what the U.S. Attorney's Office did and did not do to stop them. The evidence of the government misconduct is clear enough already that this court is justified in using its authority to craft appropriate remedies. Mr. Combs requests a court-ordered discovery and evidentiary hearing to investigate the government's misconduct. The abuse here is clear, but without a hearing, it will remain unknown how far or where the abuse reached. A hearing is thus necessary. In addition, if the hearing demonstrates that the violation of the grand jury's secrecy was intentional, as we expect it will be, the court should order the suppression of the videotape and any other illegally disclosed evidence, as well as other potential sanctions. And then it goes into the background, and it says the full extent of the government's misconduct cannot yet be known, but what is known is already enough. The government's tactics in the searches, its constant stream of statements to the press, and the leak of the hotel video demonstrate its intent to violate grand jury secrecy rules and prejudice Mr. Combs prior to trial. And it lists Examples of this. Number one, the searches. The government's campaign to prejudice Mr. Combs and the press commenced with the searches on March 25th of 2024. Notably, the searches could have been avoided altogether at no cost to the government prior to the searches. Counsel for Mr. Combs had contacted the government twice to offer cooperation. Prosecutors thus knew they could serve a subpoena on counsel for the phones, devices, and other items they sought. Indeed, after the searches had been conducted, the prosecutors did exactly this, serving 2 subpoenas on the undersigned, seeking the identical items sought in the search warrants. However, the prosecutors ignored defense counsel's invitation to discuss the case so they can engage in one of the more brutal and public searches in recent memory. They actually used the term brutal. Now, let me stop right here and say this. It would kind of defeat the purpose if you said, okay, we need all your cell phones and all your videotapes that you have in your house, and we're going to trust you to bring us all that. They're not stupid. They're going to search your house when they want to search it, when you don't know they're going to search it, so you can't hide evidence. And the defense's case here is, hey, we told them twice, we'll give you anything you need. Really? You think they would have brought 1,000 bottles of baby oil up there? Hell no. I move on. At about 12:40 p.m. on March 25th, 2024, over 100 armed federal agents massed 3 locations. Over 50 agents were at a residence at Two Star Island in Miami, Florida. Over 50 more were at Mr. Combs' property in Los Angeles, and over 30 more were prepared to stop and search an airplane that Mr. Combs and his family were taking to a spring break vacation. These searches were specifically designed to be public spectacles of brutality and were not primarily focused merely on acquiring potential evidence. First, the searches were carried out in the middle of the day to optimize media exposure. Typically, searches are conducted in the quiet, early mornings. In this case, however, they were conducted in the middle of the day, both in Los Angeles and Florida, so that the media could cover them before a large audience. Well, I would submit to you, maybe that's when he would least expect it, but I'll move on. Second, the media was present at the inception of the Los Angeles search. In fact, one media outlet boasted on air that it was on site and even filming even before the crime scene tape was up. It was thus clear that DHS alerted the media prior to the search in order to maximize exposure. And I'll submit to you on that statement that by this time, I personally had, I think I was in episode 4 or 5 of the Diddy Saga. I've been reporting this. I'm sure they had people stationed up, outside of his house constantly. They knew it was coming. Everybody knew it was coming. Go back and listen to episodes 3 and 4 where I'm saying any day now, Diddy's houses are going to get searched. This was no surprise. Third, the agents arrived in military armored style vehicles with scores of heavily armed agents in full combat gear. One would think they were attempting something much larger than to seize some phones and computers. This show of force had no legitimate purpose. It was merely an attempt to garner further press attention, sensationalize the case, and portray Mr. Combs as dangerous. The show of force was particularly egregious given the authorities knew Mr. Combs' children, who are innocent and who would have never been the target of this investigation, were likely to be present. Well, the only comment I can make on that is Mr. Combs is in fact dangerous. And in upcoming episodes, I'll tell you why, but I totally get it. And you are trying to intimidate. They don't know who they're going to run into there. You're at a billionaire's house conducting a search warrant who is known to have many bodyguards. So I'll leave it there. Fourth, the agents used excessive force against Mr. Combs' children who were at home doing nothing wrong. One agent held a semi-automatic rifle to the head of Christian Combs, even though he was visibly complying with the agent's demands. Another agent had a semi-automatic rifle with a laser sight trained in the orange dot visible in the middle of the chest of Justin Combs. Like his brother, Justin was also complying. The agents then handcuffed Christian and Justin inside the house and marched them to the front yard of the house, where news cameras and a helicopter, all invited by authorities, were waiting to get salacious footage. After perp walking these two completely innocent young men and displaying them in handcuffs and under restraint to the media, the agents walked them back in the house still in handcuffs and released them. These tactics had no possible purpose other than to garner sensational medical coverage. It worked. And let me just say this on that. You're right, it worked. The issue I have with what they're saying here relative to the tactical vehicles and the guys being dressed up in basically SWAT gear, number one, it's an intimidation tactic. That's all it is. They don't want any problems. And so in effect, they want to scare you a little bit. Now, I have watched that footage and they went overboard on pointing the red dots at the kids and stuff. And they're not kids. Look, one of them is in his 20s, but they probably went a little far on that, if I'm being fair. However, the fact they showed up in armored vehicles and in tactical gear, that's an intimidation tactic that is used in every raid, which is essentially what this was. They're calling a search warrant. This was a raid. Then they move on and they talk about statements made to the press. And they say, when the searches concluded, the public relations campaign by the agents moved into high gear. There were scores of public statements made by the agents, only a small sampling of which will be included here. On March 25th of 2024, agents and a spokesman from Homeland Security Investigations confirmed that the government was conducting an ongoing sex trafficking investigation. That day, a source further disclosed to the press that 4 Jane Does and 1 John Doe had already sat for interviews with the Southern District of New York investigators for a probe related to alleged sex trafficking and racketeering. The next day, on March 26th, law enforcement sources told the New York Post that agents wanted to seize the 54-year-old's phones and computers and that his properties in New York and Chicago will be next. Sources further reported that the searches were based on a warrant issued by New York. On March 27th, 2 days after the searches of Mr. Combs' residences, an agent specifically identified as working for DHS made public statements to, among other media, the New York Post, that said, "We believe there's a disturbing history of sex trafficking. We are responding to concrete, detailed allegations, and this is not random. We did not choose his name out of a hat. We had allegations that we're following up on." The source, identified as an officer with the Department of Homeland Security, went on to tell the press, "You have to understand that we didn't just decide on a whim to search his homes. A federal judge had to sign off. This isn't a witch hunt." The DHS operative further shared, "That's a funny thing about victims. They may be reluctant to speak at first, but when they start talking, they talk. They talk a lot. We're getting a lot of cooperation from a lot of people who want to see him brought to justice." The New York Post further described the source of these quotes as a Miami-based officer who spoke under the condition of anonymity and confirmed Mr. Combs is under investigation. Let me take that point real quick. Okay, he's telling the facts, and the public has a right to know. This is a fine line in the law because there is such a thing as the public's right to know. Everything that these people discuss here, this is why this is all bullshit. By the time that this DHS leaker came out and was leaking this information, allegedly, they had already had 50 lawsuits. I covered them all for y'all. All of this was known. His sex trafficking lawsuits and his shit beating out of Cassie lawsuits and his raping of all these people lawsuits. I covered all that. All that was known. Everything that they're being accused of leaking so far, I already told you. And let me go back real quick and just say on the prior argument that they were making regarding, marching his sons out and doing the perp walk. I submit to you this. That was a message to Diddy. They don't care about the media seeing that, but they know one thing. If the media reports it, it's going to get back to Diddy. And they were trying to draw Diddy out of the shadows and say, hey, you either man up and come in here and face this shit, or we're going to harass everybody around you. until you do it, because this is all your fault. At the end of the day, y'all, don't forget this. Anything that has happened that they're bitching about right here is because of that sumbitch doing what he did. This is his doing. But we'll continue on. 2 days later, on March 29th, law enforcement sources told ABC News that prosecutors have interviewed a number of Diddy accusers, including those who have filed civil suits. The next day, on March 30th, 2024, a reporter in the New York Post stated to News Nation that according to Homeland Security sources, the investigation into Combs was on the tip of the iceberg and that nothing was off the table. On April 2nd of 2024, a media outlet called The Source reported that sources close to the case shared that authorities have requested telecommunication records related to Combs. It further reported The Source, who requested anonymity due to the sensitive nature of the matter, disclosed that Homeland Security investigators are also keen in obtaining flight records associated with Combs. These flight records include passenger lists and could provide valuable insights into Combs' movements and activities. And it goes on and says, within the first week of the searches, the agents, all of whom were involved in the ongoing grand jury investigation, informed the press the purported victims had been interviewed, that they had obtained and executed search warrants, and that they were obtaining telecommunications and flight records, presumably with grand jury subpoenas. That their grand jury investigation was getting a lot of cooperation from a lot of people who wanted to see him brought to justice. And the grand jury investigation into Combs was the tip of the iceberg. In addition, the agent's public statements were solely designed to prejudice the grand jury and the public. And it goes on to say, between the grand jury leaks and the public statements, the agents all but ensured the grand jury would be tainted, as well as the general public, from which we will soon select a jury. These inflammatory and false public statements continue up to the present. On September 18th of 2024, a Department of Homeland Security agent told the New York Post that the music mogul had rooms that were clearly dedicated to sex, with cameras all around. The source was identified as one of the DHS agents who helped raid Mr. Combs' Florida home, and further described video evidence obtained during that investigation. The agent went on to tell the press, so if you were in these sex parties, you were being recorded from every possible angle, including angles you would not have known about. The Homeland Security agent then told the New York Post, it's my opinion that it's as bad as Jeffrey Epstein. These women are young, either barely legal or barely illegal. The indictment alleges a single victim as part of a sex trafficking charge, an adult woman with whom Mr. Combs had a romantic relationship for 10 years. For the agent to make public statements and the conduct involves barely illegal women, and that Mr. Combs is as bad as Jeffrey Epstein, is destructive to Mr. Combs' right to a fair trial, particularly in light of the fact that the only victim in the indictment was an adult throughout the charged conduct. And let me say this on that. He never said anything, and I'm talking about the Homeland Security agent that he's referencing. He never said anything about the indictment. He said that there were videos that they seized at the residence that showed women who were young, either barely legal or barely illegal. And it's his opinion. And he said that in the New York Post. It's my opinion he's as bad as Jeffrey Epstein. Hey, everybody's entitled to an opinion, Diddy Combs lawyers. Everybody. It's my opinion, too. It's Jim Chapman's opinion on the Diddy Saga, on exposed scandalous files of the elite, that this sumbitch is worse. How about that? Worse than Jeffrey Epstein. And that's bad. We'll move on. And they move on to the leaked hotel videotape. In the midst of this 7-month campaign to impugn Mr. Combs' reputation before trial, on Friday, May 17th, 2024, a 2016 videotape for the Intercontinental Hotel in Los Angeles was leaked to CNN. By far the most likely source of the leak is the government. That is true for several reasons. First, as set forth on May 17, 2024, federal agents had already engaged in a month-long campaign of leaking information to the press. They had demonstrated propensity of embracing contacts at numerous press outlets and leaking information in order to produce media coverage. Second, victim one is not likely the source of the leak. And he's talking about Cassie. There is no evidence that either she or her lawyers had possession of the tape. To the contrary, had either victim one or her lawyer had the tape, the allegations in the civil complaint would have been entirely different and far more specific than they were. Moreover, victim one had no motive to approach law enforcement, much less leak a videotape. She had sued Mr. Combs and received a substantial 8-figure settlement. The government's investigation only began after her lawsuit was settled. I would say to the lawyers right there on that dumbass comment they just made, she had every motive to leak the tape because that sucker was making her screw porn stars all over the country, male porn stars, and he beat the shit out of her in a hotel, one occasion that's on videotape in that hotel lobby, but many occasions that aren't on videotape. She had every motive to approach law enforcement. Come on. Third, an unrelated third party is not a likely source. If a person not in law enforcement were to leak the videotape to a news source, that person likely would have sold the tape rather than simply giving it to CNN. Well, you don't know that. Outlets such as TMZ are known to pay tens of thousands of dollars for such footage, but yet it was leaked to CNN to show a motive other than financial profit. It shows a motive to damage Mr. Cohn's reputation, a motive held by federal agents. And let me say this. Yep, that definitely damaged his reputation. And maybe this person's motive wasn't money. Maybe this person's motive was they just wanted to see Mr. Combs get what was coming to him. You ever think about that? Fourth, the timing of the leak suggests government involvement. The tape was leaked one of the few days that the Trump trial was not being held, as Barron Trump, Donald Trump's youngest son, graduated from high school in Florida that day, and his father was in attendance. One of the issues in the Trump trial was whether the trial would be stayed so that Trump could attend his son's graduation. Eventually, the court announced that May 17th would not be a trial day. This was a fact that would have been known to federal agents, and they also would have known that May 17th was the perfect time, as it was a slow news day, given the break in the Trump trial. Early in the morning of May 17th, a CNN reporter informed a member of Mr. Combs' public relations team that CNN had come across a video from the Intercontinental Hotel. The reporter went on to say, "Through our reporting, we confirmed the video is authentic." The reporter sought comment and also stated CNN was reaching out to victim one's representatives, which is Cassie, for comment. At 10:22 that morning, defense counsel emailed the prosecution team to say CNN was in possession of the videotape and that counsel was concerned about the circumstances by which it was provided to CNN. The government acknowledged defense counsel's email hours after the tape was made public, but as far as defense counsel is aware, took no further action. Regardless, a few hours after defense counsel made the prosecutors aware that CNN had the tape, CNN released it to overwhelming international attention. You know what? It's the truth. And releasing that tape was the right thing to do so people could see what they're dealing with. The videotape was leaked to CNN for one reason alone: to mortally wound the reputation and prospect of Sean Combs. I'm going to stop there, and I'm just going to say, how about Sean Combs take some responsibility? Had he not done that, a videotape wouldn't exist. And it moves on and says, Sean Combs successfully defending himself against these allegations rather than using the videotape as trial evidence alongside other evidence that gives it context and meaning. I don't know what context you could put into that tape. The agents misused it in the most prejudicial and damaging way possible. The government knew what it had: a frankly deplorable tape recording of Sean Combs in a towel, hitting, kicking, and dragging a woman in full view of a camera in the hallway of a hotel. Well, at least you admit it. Lawyers for Diddy Combs, at least you admit that they knew what they had. That's right. You know what they had? Evidence. They had evidence. Proof. Irrefutable proof of this monster. I continue on. The potential problem for the government is that if an agent provided the videotape to CNN, this would be a violation of grand jury secrecy. This is, among other things, what the hearing will determine, because it is reasonable to believe that this was obtained in connection with a grand jury investigation, that it was intentionally given to CNN to be released to the world, and that there was a strong possibility the person providing it was a federal agent involved in the investigation. The remedy for this conduct should be full suppression of the videotape the government leaked. So what they're saying and all that, and this is the most despicable part of all, we want this videotape suppressed and not able to show to the jury because we believe that the only reason that videotape is out there is because the government released it. Lastly, it covers requested relief, and it says, based on the foregoing, Mr. Combs requests the following relief. This court should order an evidentiary hearing to investigate the misconduct detailed above, as well as other misconduct that may yet come to light. Here, the defense has shown evidence that a hearing should be held because it is clear agents involved in this investigation spoke to the press about matters relating to and affecting the grand jury and leaked evidence. The agents here were specifically identified in press accounts as HSI and DHS operatives, and specifically as Miami-based officers who helped raid Mr. Combs' Florida home. Second, in advance of that hearing, the court should order relevant discovery from the government. This should include any emails or text messages by government attorneys or law enforcement agents regarding these and other leaks of information about the investigation or prosecution of this case. And third, this court should immediately enter an order forbidding government attorneys and agents involved in the case from leaking any further information to the media. The order should cover all grand jury material as well as non-public information related to the investigation and prosecution of Mr. Combs. Fourth, here's the caveat to this whole thing. Get ready. Fourth, after the hearing and the extent and nature of the misconduct has been clarified, Mr. Combs will submit requests for additional appropriate remedies, including disqualification of witnesses, suppression of evidence, including the 2016 video, and dismissal of all charges in the indictment. And that was dated October 9th, 2024, just 3 days from this recording. And I want to thank Miss Jacqueline Carla before I go any further. She's a fan of the show, and she was the one who sent me this. It was probably within hours of it being released. I had actually got out of recording a podcast and saw the message on Facebook. So thank you so much, Miss Jacqueline, for making me aware of that. And let's talk about all this. This is nothing more than the defense grasping at straws. Now, I don't fault them for filing this, and there probably were some leaks in here that were probably questionable. I don't know if there was necessarily government involvement, but the fact that you're trying to get that video now thrown out, suppressed to where it doesn't exist, no way that happens. I'm going to tell you right now, that ain't going to happen. The judge ain't going to let that happen. This man is on video majorly assaulting this female. And I'm glad it got out there and was shown personally. But there you have it. And as I mentioned at the top of this one, Diddy had his first appearance in court on October 10th in what's known as a pretrial hearing. And his entire family was there. His kids, his mother, and a lot of his supporters. Now, during this hearing, the assistant U.S. attorney, Emily Johnson, struck back against the motion that I just read you and stated that she took issue with the defense lawyer's argument regarding the leaked video in particular of Diddy, beating the shit out of Cassie. And it's no surprise that the prosecutors urged the judge to strongly look at those claims and called them baseless. They accused the defense of trying to exclude damning pieces of evidence. And I agree with that 100%. Now, while the judge did not completely issue a gag order, which was something else I just brought up that they were requesting, he did issue what is known as a perspective order, which would restrict what both sides can say publicly about the case. So that's a win of sorts for Diddy's team. And look, these are good lawyers. His defense team is a bunch of rock stars too. They're going to have some small wins here and there. And that is a small win for them, because while the entire case is not gagged and nobody can say anything, they're going to restrict what can be said. Also in this hearing, the trial date has now been set. And I'm going to warn you ahead of time, with these high-profile cases like this often changes. If you're a true crime fan and you're following the serial killer case from Idaho, that case, the trial date has been moved probably 7 times already. So with these high-profile cases, it's possible that they could be moved several times, but it has been set for now. I'll tell you that in just a second. Diddy's team of lawyers, they've been really pushing for the right to a speedy trial, which you have that right, and that's fine. I want to see a speedy trial too. I wish it was tomorrow personally, but they've really been pushing for that for several reasons. Number one, Diddy's in jail, and it looks like he's going to be in jail until he has his trial. So the quicker you get to the trial, the quicker he can get out of it. But they have been pushing for that, and they've set a date for May 5th of 2025 to start the actual trial. And I know y'all are a lot like me, I'm sure, and thinking, man, that's 7-8 months from now. Y'all, that's actually pretty fast for a case this large and all of the moving parts of this case. I was surprised that they set a date that soon. I was thinking this wouldn't be until November or December of next year. So they're going to start it on May 5th, assuming it's not moved. And I would say in all likelihood it will be. So take it with a grain of salt. Lastly, on the developments, the defense team has appealed, of course, the decision to leave Diddy in jail pending his trial. Now, I told you about a $50 million bail package that they offered, ankle monitors, all of that. But a ruling from an appellate court has not been issued. They actually appealed that because it was turned down by the courts. The appellate court has not issued a ruling. I don't think they're going to overrule what the current court has already ruled on twice, but you never know what the legal system is going to do sometimes. So there's a chance he could get out of jail still. And that's about all the up-to-date information on Sean Diddy Combs. Please continue to share the podcast, tell your friends, and most importantly, rate the podcast on whatever platform you're listening on right now. Hit those 5 stars or whatever options it gives you. And when you do that, put one word, just one word in the comment section. It makes all the difference in the world to the success of this podcast. Lastly, Murdaugh series is on fire. People are loving that Murdaugh series as much as they love this Diddy series. And Thursday, we have another episode of Murdaugh dropping. I just recorded it, and it's dropping on Thursday. You are going to absolutely love it. So check out the Murdaugh series if you like this series with Diddy. And until next time, I'm Jim Chapman for Exposed Scandalous Files of the Elite. Much love.